The reunion hall was loud, polished, and cruel. My cousin Talia clinked her champagne glass, smiling like a blade catching light. "Let's be honest," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd. "We all saved Faith Lily. Without this family, she wouldn't be anything." Laughter rippled through the room. Heads nodded in agreement. Phones lifted as someone started recording. I swallowed the burn rising in my throat and kept my face perfectly calm, even as my mother watched the lies spread like expensive perfume through the crowd. Then Talia added, her voice dropping to something softer and more dangerous. "Tell them how you used to beg us for help, Faith Lily." I felt the room tilt sideways, the floor shifting beneath my feet. Because she wasn't just rewriting my story in front of everyone. She was daring me to agree with her version. Daring me to accept their narrative as truth. I looked across the crowded room, following the thread of pleased glances and knowing smiles. And that's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. Talia wasn't the one who'd started this script. She was just performing it. I traced the satisfied expressions back to their source and found her. Aunt Marisol. Perfect pearls, perfect smile, perfect control. She wasn't surprised by any of this. She looked satisfied. I followed the laughter with my eyes and watched it all lead back to Aunt Marisol, like tributaries flowing to a river. She stood near the stage in her tailored dress and signature pearls, looking like old money and quiet power. When people finally turned away from me, when the attention shifted to other conversations and the recording phones lowered, Marisol stepped close. She moved through the crowd like she owned every inch of space. She leaned in and murmured just loud enough for me to hear. "You should be grateful, Faith Lily. We allowed you to become presentable." The words landed like ice water. I nodded like I was swallowing it, like I accepted that version of reality. But inside, something went cold and sharp and focused. Because I understood now. Marisol wasn't just gossiping about me to family members. She was branding me publicly, deliberately. She was creating a narrative that would follow me forever. A story where I was the charity case and they were the generous saviors. And she was doing it in public on purpose, where it would stick, where it would be witnessed and remembered. As I walked toward the exit, needing air and space to think, I saw something that made me stop cold. A banner hung near the stage, professionally printed and mounted. Legacy fundraiser for Hawthorne Ridge Winery. My grandfather's name was printed beneath it in elegant script, and my name was nowhere on it at all. I changed direction and walked toward the memorial display instead of the exit. My legs felt strange, disconnected. The display was beautiful, professional, expensive. Old photos of the vineyard in golden frames. Awards my grandfather had won over decades. His worn work hat preserved in a glass box like a museum piece. Then I saw the story plaque, the one explaining the winery's history. I read it slowly, my vision blurring at the edges. It credited Marisol and her husband Vance as the true keepers of the legacy. It said they had carried the family through the hardest years with dedication and sacrifice. I stared at those words until they stopped making sense. Because those hardest years they were claiming credit for were when I'd worked late nights at 2 jobs. When I'd sent money home quietly every month. When my grandfather used to call me on Sunday mornings and say I was his last honest worker. When I'd spent summers in those fields learning every vine, every season, every careful decision that made good wine. I didn't cry. I wouldn't give them that. Instead, I smiled. A small, private smile that felt like a promise to myself. Behind the display, 2 voices floated over from the hallway. I moved closer, pretending to study a photograph. "Once we sell the winery," someone whispered, "Faith Lily will disappear for good." My heart stopped, then started again, harder. I moved carefully into the hallway, staying quiet. Marisol stood talking to a man in a tailored coat. He had that professional broker energy, calm and sharp and expensive. I caught pieces of their conversation as I walked slowly past, pretending to check my phone. Valuation. Clean title. Interested buyers, no loose ends. Then Marisol said the part that made my stomach drop to the floor. "If Granddad left her anything in writing, we can bury it. She won't fight back, she never does." Her voice was confident, certain, like she knew me completely and had already planned around every possible move I might make. I walked past them like I hadn't heard a single word, like I was just another guest heading to the bathroom. Outside, the night air tasted like metal, sharp and cold and real. I stood in the parking lot, my hands shaking as I pulled out my phone. My screen lit up with a notification. Unknown number. The text message was short and terrifying. They forged something. Call me. I stared at those words, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then I pressed the call button with trembling fingers. Someone out there knew what was happening. Someone was trying to warn me, and I was done pretending I didn't notice the knives in my back. A tired voice answered on the second ring. Miss Ridge? This is Helen Delaney. I was your grandfather's bookkeeper. She sounded afraid and angry at the same time, like she'd been carrying a secret that was burning her from the inside. They changed documents after he got sick, she said without preamble. And they're about to sell Hawthorne Ridge. Your grandfather absolutely did not want that. I gripped my phone harder, my knuckles going white. Why are you telling me this now? Why not before? There was a long pause. Then she spoke again, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Because tonight they put you on stage to bury you publicly. That means they're close to finishing. That means they feel safe enough to humiliate you openly. The truth of that hit me like a physical blow. They wouldn't have been so bold, so public with their rewriting of history, unless they thought I had no power to fight back. Unless they were certain I'd already lost. What do you mean they forged something? I asked. Delaney's breathing was shaky. Documents, signatures, your grandfather's wishes. They changed everything while he was dying. She paused again, and when she spoke next, her voice shook. Faith Lily, your grandfather left you controlling rights to Hawthorne Ridge, and they stole them. The next morning, I drove to the attorney's office listed in my grandfather's old address book, the one he'd kept by his phone, filled with careful handwriting and coffee stains. The receptionist looked up when I gave my name, and something uncomfortable crossed her face. Your aunt already handled everything related to the estate, she said too quickly. Her eyes didn't meet mine. I insisted. I waited. I sat in that lobby and refused to leave even when she hinted I should. Finally, the attorney appeared. Older, sweating despite the air conditioning. Guilty in a way that radiated from every gesture. He invited me into his office with the resigned air of someone who knew this conversation was coming eventually. Your grandfather did revise his will, he admitted, sitting heavily behind his desk. About 6 months before he passed. But the revised copy is missing. He didn't say stolen. He didn't have to. The word hung in the air between us anyway, loud and obvious. How does a legal document just go missing? I asked quietly. He looked away. These things happen sometimes. Filing errors, misplaced papers, lies, all of it. I stood to leave, my mind already racing ahead to what I needed to do next. As I walked out through the lobby, a man stepped into my path. He was blocking the door deliberately. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it at all. Stop digging, Faith Lily. The man introduced himself as Hale. Family security, he said, like that was a normal thing families had. Like hiring someone to intimidate relatives was just standard practice. Marisol is worried you'll embarrass yourself, he continued, his voice polite but his eyes cold. It's better if you let the grown-ups handle business matters. I looked at him for a long moment, then I replied calmly, keeping my voice steady. Tell Marisol I'm not asking for permission to exist. His smile faded like ice melting. The polite mask slipped just slightly, and I saw something harder underneath. You're making this complicated, he muttered, stepping aside reluctantly. I walked past him and out to my car, my hands steady even though my heart was pounding. I didn't let him see fear, didn't let him see anything but calm determination. That night, I returned to my apartment and noticed something that made my skin crawl. Scratches around my door lock. Fresh ones, like someone had tested it, measured it, checked whether they could get inside. Then they decided to send a message instead. A warning. They were telling me they could reach me whenever they wanted, that my private space wasn't safe, that I should be afraid. I took photos of the scratches, documented everything. Then I deadbolted the door and started planning my next move. Because fear was exactly what they wanted, and I refused to give it to them. I drove to Hawthorne Ridge at dawn when the light was still soft and the roads were empty. The vines looked tired as I approached, like they'd been neglected. The gates looked newer, shinier, like someone had bought control and wanted to mark their territory. A padlock I didn't recognize hung where my grandfather's old worn one used to be. I stood there for a long moment, breathing slowly, remembering how he'd press a grape into my palm during harvest season and say, "Taste it faithfully. Learn what's real." How he'd taught me to read the vines like a language. How he'd trusted me with the parts of this business that mattered most. A truck rolled up the gravel drive, dust rising behind it. The foreman stepped out and squinted at me in the early morning light. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, not unkindly, but firmly. I looked at him, at this man who'd worked these fields for 20 years. "Funny," I answered quietly. "I was raised here. I learned this business on these exact vines." He shifted uncomfortably, looking back toward the main building like he was checking if someone was watching. Then he hesitated, his expression conflicted. "They told us you signed away your rights," he said finally, his voice dropping, "that you wanted nothing to do with the place anymore." The lie was so complete, so thorough, they'd even convinced the workers. The foreman looked around nervously, then pulled out a folded paper from his truck's glove compartment. "I probably shouldn't show you this," he said, "but it didn't sit right with me." He handed me a copied form. My name was at the bottom in shaky ink that didn't look anything like my actual signature. A surrender document, a waiver, a complete lie. I stared at it, feeling something settle deep in my chest. Not rage, not panic, just cold, focused clarity. "Where did you get this?" I asked calmly. He looked embarrassed, ashamed to be part of it, even unknowingly. "From Marisol's office. She distributed copies to all the managers, said you were moving on to other opportunities and didn't want to be involved anymore." I took a photo of the document with my phone, making sure to capture every detail. Then I handed it back to him carefully. "Tell no one you showed me this," I said quietly. "Can you do that?" He nodded, relieved. "I'm sorry, Miss Ridge. Your grandfather was a good man." As I turned away from the vineyard, my throat tight with grief and anger, I saw a for-sale stake near the tasting room. Freshly planted, professional signage, a car pulled up behind me, tires crunching on gravel. Talia stepped out, phone already raised, filming, smiling like she'd already won some game I hadn't known we were playing. Well, she said to her camera. "Look who showed up." Talia circled me like I was content for her social media feed, not family, not someone she'd grown up with. "Tell them why you're really here," she said to the camera, her voice bright and cruel. "Trying to steal what you didn't earn?" I looked directly into her lens, my voice absolutely calm. "I'm here to visit my grandfather's work, the place I helped build." She laughed, sharp and performative. "He didn't even like you, Faith Lily. Everyone knows that." That one landed. It was designed to. The cruelest lie, delivered publicly, meant to make me react emotionally on camera, meant to make me look unstable, desperate. But I'd learned something important over the past few days. I'd learned that calm was power. I stepped closer to her and lowered my tone. "Keep recording, Talia." Her grin widened. She thought I was about to give her the dramatic meltdown she wanted. Instead, I said the sentence she didn't expect at all. "Post it everywhere. I want everyone to see your face when you learn who actually owns this place." Her smile froze, flickered. For just a second, I saw uncertainty. "What are you talking about?" she asked, but the camera was still rolling, and now she wasn't sure if she should be filming anymore. I walked to my car without answering. Let her wonder, let her worry. Let her ask Marisol if they'd actually covered every possible angle. Because I was done defending myself. I was starting to build something else entirely. Back in the city, I met Greg at a quiet coffee shop away from anywhere family might see us. Greg and I had history. Years ago, when I was broke and working 2 jobs, I'd helped him with his startup's books. Free. Just because he'd needed help and I'd had the skills. Now he ran a successful private equity firm, and he looked at me carefully across the table. "You don't want revenge," he said. "It wasn't a question. You want resolution." I nodded. "I want the legacy protected. I want it safe from people who see it as just another asset to liquidate, and I want the lies to stop controlling my life." I paused, my voice steadying. "I want my grandfather's vision preserved." Greg nodded once, decisively. "Then we do this clean, proper, legal. We buy it through a holding company, quiet, fast, before they can counter." I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for years. Maybe I had been. Can we actually do this? I asked. Do you have enough capital? Because I don't. Greg smiled slightly. You have something better than capital. You have knowledge of the business and genuine care for it. That's what investors actually want. He slid a file across the table. But you need to see this first. The winery's debt situation is worse than you probably know. Much worse. I opened the file and my stomach dropped. Someone had been deliberately bleeding it dry. We went through the numbers together, Greg explaining each line item while I struggled to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just mismanagement. It wasn't simple neglect or bad business decisions. This was deliberate sabotage. Fake invoices for services never rendered. Equipment repairs that had never actually happened. Staff paid under the table to avoid proper documentation. A slow, methodical drowning of the business. Greg's voice was low and serious. This is how people steal businesses legally. They destroy the value first, run it into the ground, then they swoop in and call it saving when they buy it for pennies. They get to be heroes while committing theft. My stomach twisted with a sick feeling. My grandfather hadn't just left me a legacy, he'd left me a battlefield. A place where people I'd trusted had been waging war against his life's work. The biggest leak is here, Greg said, pointing to a series of payments. These all go to the same account, and it's not the winery's operating account. I looked at the account information he'd highlighted, my vision blurred for a second. The account name was clear. Vance Blackwell Personal Holdings. Uncle Vance. Marisol's husband. He'd been funneling money out systematically for over 2 years. Stealing from my grandfather while he was sick. Stealing from the business while pretending to run it. We have enough here to press charges, Greg said quietly. I shook my head. Not yet. First, we take it back. I found Vance outside a charity board meeting. All bright lights and polished smiles and old money power. He was shaking hands with donors, playing philanthropist. He saw me approaching and his expression shifted to amused condescension. Faith Lily, he said, looking me up and down like I was still 17. Like I was still the uncertain girl asking for college money. You look lost, sweetheart. I kept my tone perfectly even. Professional. Stop draining the winery, Vance. He laughed. Actually laughed, loud enough that nearby people turned to look. You don't have the standing to tell me anything. Then he leaned closer, his voice dropping to something oily and threatening. Go back to being quiet, Faith Lily. That's the version of you people can tolerate. My jaw stayed relaxed. My eyes didn't waver. Is that a threat? He smiled. It's advice, free advice, which is more than you deserve. As I turned to leave, he made his critical mistake. The one that would come back to destroy him. He said it out loud, confident and careless. Besides, we already fixed the will. You have nothing. Fixed. Not handled or managed. Fixed. Like it was broken and they'd corrected it. Like they'd changed something that needed changing. I walked away with that word echoing in my head. Fixed. An admission. A confession. Proof that they'd altered my grandfather's final wishes. And Vance had just admitted it where I could hear. That night, I sat across from my mother in her small apartment. No yelling, no accusations, just silence heavy enough to crack stone. She avoided my eyes, staring at her hands in her lap like they belonged to someone else. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered finally. I felt something deeper than anger. Grief. The kind that settles in bones and stays forever. You signed something, I said. Not a question, a statement. Her lips trembled. Marisol said it was just paperwork. She said it would keep peace in the family, that it would prevent fighting. Peace. The word tasted like poison in the air between us. What did you sign, Mom? She wiped her eyes. I don't know, I didn't read it. She said it was just confirming that everything was being handled properly, that the estate was being settled fairly. My hands clenched in my lap. Did you sign my name to anything? No, never. I would never do that. She looked up finally, desperate for me to believe her. But then her expression changed. Crumpled. Faith Lily, there's something else. Something I should have told you sooner. I waited. She took a shaking breath. Your grandfather tried to call you the night before he died. Multiple times. I was there at the house. Marisol answered his phone. The world tilted. What? She answered his phone and told him you were busy. That you couldn't be disturbed. That you'd call him back later. But she never told you he'd called. We got the phone records. It took 3 days and help from Greg's connections, but we got them. And there it was, documented in cold digital fax. My grandfather's number. Late at night. Repeated calls to my phone. Calls I'd never received. Calls I'd never known about. My throat tightened so hard I could barely breathe. They hadn't just rewritten my story. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance. They'd edited out my goodbye. They'd taken my last chance to hear his voice, to tell him I loved him, to say thank you for everything he'd taught me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark and let myself finally cry. Not for the money, or the winery, or the injustice, for the phone call I'd never gotten, for the last words I'd never heard. Greg called the next morning. His voice was gentle. "Do you want to stop? This is getting darker than I think you realized. We can walk away." I shook my head even though he couldn't see me. "No," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Now we finish. We finish for him." That afternoon, Delaney called again. Her voice was shaking worse than before. "Faith, Lily, they're selling in 72 hours. The deal is already moving forward. If you're going to do something, it has to be now." I looked at Greg. He was already pulling up documents on his laptop, already making calls, already moving pieces into place. We had 3 days to save my grandfather's legacy. 3 days to stop them. 3 days to take back what was stolen. The sale was framed as a legacy transfer event. They'd turned theft into a celebration. The room was packed with investors, wine critics, and smiling sharks in expensive suits. Marisol glided through the crowd like a queen at her own coronation, accepting congratulations, telling the story of how she'd saved the winery from collapse. Talia spotted me near the back and whispered loudly to someone beside her, making sure I could hear. She came to watch us win. I kept my expression neutral, calm. I dressed simply, nothing flashy, almost invisible in the crowd. Marisol stepped up to the microphone on the small stage. The room quieted. "We're honored," she began, her voice warm and practiced, "to finally rescue Hawthorne Ridge from past mistakes, to give it the professional management it deserves." Her eyes flicked to me like a knife sliding between ribs, a direct jab. Public humiliation disguised as business talk. The broker stepped forward, a professional man with careful neutrality. "Final bids will be accepted tonight. We have several interested parties." He began reading names, corporate groups, luxury brands, a tech billionaire's representative. Gasps and applause rippled through the crowd, money flying around like confetti. Marisol's smile grew wider with each bid. Then the broker paused, consulted his tablet, looked up with slight surprise. "We have a new bidder," he announced. "Ridgewell Holdings." Marisol's smile twitched, just slightly. "Who is that?" she asked, trying to sound curious rather than concerned. I didn't move, didn't blink. The broker added calmly, "Ridgewell is offering full debt coverage and a $10 million premium." Marisol went pale. Marisol's composure cracked in small, ugly ways. Her jaw tightened. She started whispering urgently to Vance. Her hands moved in sharp gestures. She pulled out her phone and made a call, turning away from the crowd, her voice too low to hear but her body language screaming panic. She approached the broker, too close, invading his personal space, smiling too hard. "This is clearly a misunderstanding," she hissed, loud enough for nearby people to hear. "We're the family. This business should stay with family." The broker replied with careful neutrality. "This is a business transaction, Mrs. Blackwell. The highest qualified bid will be accepted." Talia was still filming everything on her phone, still hungry for content, still thinking this was all going to end with their victory. But her camera started shaking slightly when she noticed her mother's hands were shaking. When she saw the fear creeping into Marisol's perfect composure. Marisol's eyes scanned the room desperately, looking for whoever might be behind Ridgewell Holdings, looking for the threat she couldn't identify. Her gaze landed on me, standing quietly in the back corner. Something in my expression must have given me away, some small flicker of satisfaction I couldn't quite hide. She walked toward me fast, her smile completely gone now. She leaned close and whispered with barely controlled fury, "What did you do?" Her breath was sharp. "Who are you working with?" I looked up at her calmly. Meeting her eyes, "I'm not working with anyone," I said quietly. "I'm working for the truth." Marisol leaned in closer, her perfume overwhelming, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "You can't afford this. I know exactly what you make, exactly what you have. This is impossible. I tilted my head slightly. You'd be surprised what quiet people can build when you stop taking credit for their work. Her face hardened into something ugly, all the polished charm stripped away. If you do this, you'll split the family forever. You'll destroy relationships that can never be repaired. I met her eyes without flinching. You split the family when you lied about who I was, when you erased my contributions, when you stole my grandfather's wishes. I'm just making sure you can't do it to anyone else. People nearby were starting to notice our conversation, starting to lean in and listen. Marisol realized it and pulled back slightly, her smile returning like a mask snapping into place. This isn't over, she said, loud enough for others to hear, friendly enough to sound normal. Family always works things out. But her eyes told a different story. Then Vance appeared behind her, sliding through the crowd. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. He leaned close to both of us and said softly, with absolute certainty, "You won't leave this room owning anything, Faith Lily. I promise you that." I felt a chill. Because this wasn't an empty threat. They had something planned, something I hadn't anticipated. And whatever it was, they were about to use it. The lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. The broker stopped mid-sentence, looking confused. A ripple of uncertainty moved through the crowd. Phones started lighting up with notifications. Murmurs spread. Greg's assistant rushed in, her face pale. She found him in the crowd and whispered urgently in his ear. I watched his expression change. Harden. He walked over to me quickly. Someone filed an emergency injunction, he said quietly. They're claiming fraud by Ridgewell Holdings, claiming you forged documents to qualify as a bidder. Marisol's smile returned. Small, vicious, victorious. You see? She said, loud enough for people around us to hear. This is what happens when people try to play games they don't understand. She looked at me with mock sympathy. It's embarrassing, really. I tried to warn you. I exhaled once, slowly, steadily. I'd expected them to fight dirty. I just hoped they'd wait a little longer to show their hand. Greg texted me under the table. I glanced at my phone. They forged your signature again. This time to frame you for fraud. They're claiming you submitted fake financial documents. My hands wanted to shake. I forced them still. Forced my breathing even. This was the moment. The moment where I could panic, or I could stay 3 steps ahead. The broker was consulting with someone on his phone. The room buzzed with speculation. Then Greg smiled slightly. He texted me one more message. They made a mistake. The broker has been waiting for this. I looked up. What did that mean? The broker has been waiting? The broker stepped back to the microphone, his expression calm like he'd expected exactly this kind of drama. Ladies and gentlemen, he said clearly, we will proceed under contingency protocol. Marisol snapped. You can't. Her composure fully shattered now, her voice rising. There's an injunction. This sale is suspended. The broker looked directly at her. Actually, Mrs. Blackwell, I can, and I will. He turned slightly to address the whole room. I received very specific instructions years ago from the late owner. Instructions to be followed should interference or fraud attempts occur during any sale of this property. My pulse spiked. What? My grandfather had planned for this? He'd anticipated they might try something exactly like this? The broker continued. Those instructions included contingency protocols and verification measures, all of which Ridgewell Holdings has met completely. Marisol's face was white. This is insane. He was sick. He didn't know what he was doing. He was entirely lucid when he gave me these instructions. The broker said firm medical documentation to that effect. And I have something else. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. A sealed letter from the late owner, to be opened tonight in the event of disputed claims. The room went completely silent. Everyone leaning forward, phones up, recording everything. I couldn't breathe. A letter? Or my grandfather? The broker carefully opened the envelope and began to read. The broker's voice was steady as he read my grandfather's words aloud. They weren't angry. They weren't bitter. They were just heartbreakingly clear. To whoever is reading this, the sale of Hawthorne Ridge was never my wish. This land represents generations of work, of care, of connection to the earth and the people who tend it. The room was absolutely silent. I know there are those in my family who see it only as an asset, who will manipulate, who will lie, who will rewrite history to justify taking what I built. I name this behavior now. I name the greed. I name the deception. Marisol's hands were shaking. Vance looked like he wanted to run. The broker continued. Control of Hawthorne Ridge belongs to my granddaughter, Faith Lily Ridge, through the entity she establishes to protect it. She is the only one who learned this business not for profit, but for love. She is the only one who sees these vines as living things, not investments. Tears blurred my vision. If others have tried to take this from her through forgery or manipulation, know that I anticipated it. Know that I chose her deliberately. Know that my mind was sound, my wishes were clear, and my trust was placed exactly where I intended. Talia's phone hit the floor with a crack. Marisol's perfect pearls looked like a noose around her neck. The broker folded the letter carefully. Ridgewell Holdings' bid is accepted, effective immediately. Vance lunged forward. This is illegal. We'll sue. Security grabbed him, held him back, and Marisol whispered to me, her voice shaking with rage and desperation, "You don't know what you just started." The next days were chaos. Absolute chaos. Critics called wanting statements. Investors gossiped. Extended relatives checked in with fake concern and thinly veiled questions about what this meant for them. Some people apologized. Some pretended they'd always supported me. Some disappeared entirely, ashamed or angry or both. I stayed quiet, didn't give interviews, didn't post victory speeches online, just handled the legal transition with Greg's help. My mother came to my apartment 3 days after the auction. She'd been crying until her face was swollen and empty. "I didn't protect you," she said, standing in my doorway. "I chose to trust them instead of you. I chose comfort over truth. I didn't punish her, but I didn't comfort her too quickly either. She needed to sit with what she'd done. I needed you, Mom," I said quietly. "When they were rewriting my story, when they were stealing my inheritance, when they were making me small, I needed you to stand up for me, and you chose their version of me instead." That truth landed like thunder in the small space between us. She nodded, tears falling. I know I did, and I don't know if you can ever forgive that." I wasn't sure either, but I let her in. Let her sit, let her start the long work of earning back what she'd lost. That evening, Hale showed up outside my building again. But this time he wasn't threatening, he was warning. "They're not done," he said quietly. "They're desperate now. Desperate people do dangerous things." I looked at him. "Are you warning me or threatening me?" "Warning," he said. "I quit working for them yesterday. What they asked me to do crossed lines I won't cross." Marisol reached out 2 weeks later. A formal invitation to meet at the vineyard to talk. The email was polite, professional, but I knew better. I drove out there during golden hour, when the light made everything look beautiful, when lies could hide easier in pretty shadows. She was waiting on the tasting room terrace, a glass of wine in hand, looking like she belonged there, like this was still her kingdom. She tried softness first. "We're still family, Faith Lily. We can fix this. Find a solution that works for everyone." I didn't answer. She tried guilt next. "Your grandfather would want us to stay together. He valued family above everything." Still, I stayed silent. Then she dropped the softness and went for the throat. "You'll ruin everything he built. You don't have the experience. You'll run it into the ground, and everyone will blame you. You'll be hated." I looked at the vines, rows and rows of them stretching into the distance. Then I looked back at her. "I've been hated in stories you wrote, Marisol. Stories where I was ungrateful, where I was nothing without you, where I was a burden you generously carried." I paused. "At least now if people hate me, it won't be for free." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "You think buying it makes you the hero of this story?" I finally faced her fully, looked her in the eyes without fear. "No," I said quietly, "it makes me unreachable." Her smile was like a wound opening. "Then I'll tell everyone the truth, that you stole it, that you manipulated a sick old man, that you turned his mind against his real family." I answered calmly, "Tell them anything you want, Marisol. The deed doesn't care." I didn't throw them out dramatically, didn't ban them from the property with security escorts, didn't post revenge statements on social media or give interviews painting them as villains. I simply started rebuilding what my grandfather had built. I paid the staff fairly, restored the equipment properly, reopened the tasting room with his photo in the place of honor where it belonged. I hired a new manager who knew vines the way my grandfather did. With respect, with patience, with care. On opening day, I placed one small plaque by the entrance. Simple bronze. Elegant lettering. Truth doesn't need permission. My mother showed up that day, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't make speeches. She just stood beside me and watched the first guests arrive. Watched them walk through doors my grandfather had built. Watched them taste wine from vines he'd planted. He would be proud, she said quietly. I breathed in the scent of grapes and old wood and hard-won freedom. I hope so. Talia's last Instagram post about me had gotten 17 angry comments calling her out. People who'd seen through the performance, who'd recognized manipulation when the full story came out. She deleted her account 3 days later. Marisol and Vance moved to a different city. The investigation into the financial fraud was ongoing. They'd likely face consequences. Real ones. Legal ones. I didn't celebrate that. But I didn't mourn it either. Some consequences are earned. Some stories end exactly where they should. 6 months later, Hawthorne Ridge was thriving. Not because I'd done anything revolutionary, because I'd simply removed the people who were killing it. Because I'd returned it to what it was always meant to be. A working vineyard. A family business run with integrity. A legacy honored rather than exploited. People ask me sometimes if I regretted the conflict. If I wished I'd stayed quiet. If the family division hurt, I told them the truth. I regretted nothing, because my life was never theirs to narrate. My story was never theirs to rewrite. My grandfather's wishes were never theirs to change. One evening I stood in the vineyard at sunset, a glass of wine in my hand. Our wine. Made from our grapes, grown in our soil. I thought about all the dinners where I'd been made to feel small. All the reunions where my contributions were erased. All the years I'd accepted their version of me because arguing seemed harder than agreeing. I thought about the toast Talia had made. How she'd said they saved me. How she'd rewritten my work as their charity. And I realized something important. They didn't save me. They tried to own me. They tried to make my success their story. Tried to turn my labor into their generosity. Tried to erase me while using everything I'd built. But I'd taken it all back. Not with cruelty, not with revenge, just with truth. Just with persistence. Just with refusing to disappear. I raised my glass to the empty vineyard, to my grandfather's memory, to the legacy that was finally, truly safe. They rewrote my story to keep me small, I said quietly to the vines. So I bought the legacy, because my life was never theirs to narrate.